Chair. Just to advise all the members that please note that the public section of this meeting will be recorded and published online for later public access after the meeting. Can all attendees mute their microphones and consider switching off their camera when not speaking? The camera and microphone should be switched on when you're invited to speak. I'll now ask members to confirm their attendance and once your name has been announced so that it is clear in the recording of the meeting and can also be recorded for the minute. Thank you. Chair Luann Grusin, I've already spoken to. Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Duncan.
Morning.
Good morning. Councillor Cook.
Morning.
Morning. Councillor Bell.
Good morning, present.
Thank you. Councillor Dunbar.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Kim Crittenden.
Good morning.
Alan Gray has intimated he will come along shortly. John Tomlinson.
Yes, good morning.
Yes. Good morning, thank you. Sandra MacLeod.
Good morning.
Good morning. Alex Stephen.
Morning.
Morning. Dr. Caroline Howarth.
Morning, everybody.
Morning. Dr. Malcolm Metcalf has intimated apologies, as has Chris Littlejohn. Mike Adams.
Morning.
Morning. Jenny Gibb.
Good morning.
Good morning. Jim Curry.
Yeah, morning.
Good morning. Graham Simpson.
Morning, Derek.
Good morning to you. Maggie Hepburn.
Morning.
Morning. Shona McFarlane.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Alison Murray.
Good morning.
Good morning. Alan Chalmers. Alan Chalmers. No. Okay. Angela Scott.
Good morning.
And I believe Councillor Sandra MacDonald should be joining us as an observer. Maybe not managed in yet. It's not an issue. It's only an observer. Okay. The chair, let's just confirm. Jess Anderson.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. And we have other partnership and NHS officers and authors present as required during the meeting. I won't include them in the roll call. That's the roll call complete, Chair. All I would wish to highlight prior to you beginning the meeting is that items 17 and 21 in the late circulation pack were indeed submitted late, as had been intimated prior to this meeting. Chair, you may wish to consider these matters for acceptance in terms of urgency, in terms of section 12, subsection 2 of the standing orders.
Thanks, Derek, and I'm happy to take them as late papers. That seems very appropriate to me. So thank you. If I can just say, and I've said this at the last meeting, if people are comfortable, it really helps me if people keep their cameras on, because I just like to see faces rather than feel like I'm chairing it in the dark. But entirely your own decision about that. But I find that helpful. Just firstly to note, there's a really packed agenda for today. The meeting's scheduled until 2 o'clock. I plan to ensure we have a break in about an hour and a half, and then we'll see where we are by 1 o'clock. So Derek, could you keep me right and suggest an appropriate gap between agenda items for a break at around 11:30, if that's okay. I'll also try and go through papers that are here for noting, maybe a bit more quickly, to allow sufficient time for the papers where we're actually required to make a decision for the IJB. But I'm really trying to get a balance, because all the items on the agenda are really important. So we'll just work through this together. And also wanted to acknowledge this is my first scheduled IJB meeting as chair. For those who don't know me, I'm a non-exec member on the board of NHS Grampian, but I've worked in the third sector for 25 years, including as chief exec officer, And I suppose just for you to know that as a result of that, I put a high value on putting lived experience at the centre of our considerations, and I see our communities as assets, not our problems. I also highly value collaborative working, and I really believe that we as a group of people will do our best for everyone in Aberdeen, if we listen to lots of voices, lots of different views, and make sure that they are all heard and valued. So I'm really looking forward to working with you all, and my virtual door is always open for conversations out with the formal meetings of the IJB. So thank you. On to business now. Declarations of interest for today's meeting. Does anyone want to raise anything? If you could use the hand function, that would be helpful. No, I'm not seeing anyone raising a hand. Okay. No, okay, so we've got determination of exempt business. So there are two items that are considered exempt business today. One is part of the supplementary procurement plan around mental health services, and the second is the paper on community nursing digitalisation, and they both follow Aberdeen City Council regulations in terms of what is considered exempt. So I hope folk are comfortable with that. Yeah, okay, good. We'll now move on then to the minute of the board meeting of the 23rd of March. First of all, for accuracy, I'm not intended to go through page by page, but if people have read that minute and want to raise anything for accuracy, if you could do that now. No, I'm not seeing anyone, so we're content to take that as an accurate record of the meeting. Do we have any matters arising from that minute that anybody wants to raise? No, okay. So we'll move on to the minute of the meeting of the 27th of April. First of all, for approval as an accurate record of that meeting. People content with that as an accurate record? Okay, I'm seeing nodding heads. Do we have any matters arising from that minute? No. Okay. Thank you. So item 6 now is the draft minute of the Clinical Care Governance Committee. This is here for noting. Leslie, are there any parts of that meeting minute that you would like to highlight for IJB members today?
We did ask for an escalation in terms of a verbal update that the Chief Officer had brought us in regard to COVID, and it's on the agenda for today's business. And briefly, we also heard about the reinstatement of the inspection for the adult support and protection services, which will, happen within the next 12-month period, and the plans that are being put in place using the previous justice social work methodology for inspection. And also we said goodbye and thanked Dr. Graham Gold in terms of his role with the Clinical and Care Governance Group and the committee. That was it.
Thanks, Leslie. And I think if we can note that in a minute, that we would all send our appreciation for Graham's contribution to his work around Clinical Care Governance Committee. That would be appreciated. Does anyone have any questions for Leslie or any comments on that minute? No. I see Alan Chalmers has joined us too, so good to see you, Alan. Welcome. So we'll now go on to the minute of the Risk Audit and Performance Meeting Committee for noting. John, do you want to highlight some items?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you'll see that it was a busy agenda. A lot of assurance reports coming through, including a review of the duties over the past year. And probably one of the things that was highlighted at the committee was the recognition that the officers had kept things going extremely well in the circumstances, so that we were able to have a high degree of assurance to then pass on to this board. The other point to highlight was we examined the risk issues that had been remitted to us, and they're now reflected in the report at 12 on this agenda. So that would be what I'd want to highlight.
Thanks, John. Any comments or questions from any IJB members on the RAP committee? No. Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful to see that. Item 8 now on to the business planner. I'm just going to hand over to Alex. If there's maybe headlines that you want to highlight on the business planner, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So a couple of little bits that would just say there. So the audit accounts, I've said a special meeting at of Risk Audit and Performance Committee. I'm just in discussion with the auditors today and still trying to conclude that whether we can actually do something on the 22nd of June. So that would mean we wouldn't need a special meeting, but the Risk Audit and Performance Committee will need to meet at some point in time to have a look at the accounts. And the only thing that's potentially stopping us going for the 22nd will be how it impacts on the audit of the council, because it's the same auditors who are looking at it. So that's something that we're actively working on. You can see in relation to the 2C redesign that a report will come back on the 6th of July. The reduction in notional rents, they are no longer, that's no longer required. We managed to find an alternative approval and governance route for that. And then on the public engagement strategy, we're going to do more engagement. So we're looking at bringing that back in September. There's one final thing that would be worthwhile adding to the report would be the Primary Care Improvement Fund or plan, and we're looking to have another look at that and bring it back to the board in November. So, Chair, that's all I've got to say in terms of the business planner.
Thank you, Alex. I'll open that up for any comments or questions from folk. Oh, I'm not seeing any hands up. People are being very, very quiet so far. Sarah, you said it would be difficult. Okay, you'll see that there's been a lot added since the last meeting, and there will be continued to be other items probably put on as the year goes on, but we're starting to fill out agendas for the rest of the year. Okay, so we'll note the business planner and move on to item 9, which is Chief Officer's report. Over to Sandra for that.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So you have before you the report, and just really wanted to highlight a few key areas. First one is about the IJB annual report, and as you're aware, the IJB has a statutory obligation to produce an annual performance report, and to demonstrate the delivery against our strategic plan. In 2020, we had some leeway in both terms of time when it was due and also the content, and that was prepared with the 2019-20 report and was approved in September by the IJB. We have similar leeway this year from SG with regards to time and content, but we are expecting and working towards an agenda to have the annual report with IJB for August, in August IJB. Second point to really raise is that a meeting date will, as Alex has already says, is the meeting date will be held in June for the final accounts. Third point is regarding the care homes, which there's a bit of detail. And while we've seen that care homes have significantly stabilised across, we still have a really strong focus and a strong focus from Scottish Government. The paper does outline the response that we've had to ensure all 1,100 residents have been undertaking a formal review. Also reminds the board of the oversight, support and assurance and collaboration that is in place to assist with resilience across the sector. It should also be noted the positive impact that returning to visits have had in place across the care homes. I think that that's been, although anecdotal evidence, it's really positive feedback from both families and from service users. Last point really is that the NHS transition from Operation Snowdrop has brought some interim arrangements around portfolio management. And as Chief Officer has additional specific responsibilities in that, but we'll come back with a paper informing of any developments or impact for that in July. And that's and finally the adult support protection. We're just continuing to work towards that, although no date's been given. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Sandra. I'll open that up for questions from people. Okay. Sarah.
Just two separate things. The first is the financial update, paragraph 3.4, and I see that we're going to end the year with a reserve of 15.4 million, which is more than was reported when we considered the medium-term financial strategy back in March. So I wondered if we could have an update on the difference and actually confirmation of how much, if any, of that money is ring-fenced for other things and how much we expect to spend on COVID-related expenditure from the current kind of upsurge that we've just gone through in COVID.
Alex, can I bring you in?
Yeah, thank you. The about £9 million of the £15 million is ring fenced for specific purposes such as either the PSIP, Action 15, alcohol and drugs, or COVID. In relation to COVID, I think the figures about, off the top of my head, is between 2.5 and 3 million. Somewhere I think it might be 2.6 million. And we'll be able to get more money for COVID through the same sort of processes that we've been through this financial year. So we're working our way through that. Within the, I've kind of been very, we've been able to top up the risk fund to £2.5 million on that basis, and then we've got £4 million or so sitting in an integration and change fund reserve. So we're working our way through that as well. But the main reasons for the difference was additional income coming in the last quarter, and that pushed the financial position away. I was aware of that. I thought that was going to happen during the medium-term financial framework. I couldn't be absolutely certain there wouldn't be movements on some of the mainstream services. So I wasn't overly explicit about that, but I did have a good feeling it was going to end up that way, and thankfully it did. So we've got a little bit of coverage now. We need to. I'm not proposing to do anything for the reserve, although one of the papers today talks about spending a small amount of that to help with some technology somewhere within the system. But I think I don't really want to go out and do a mass exercise about how we're going to spend that money until we see what the position looks like this financial year in terms of how much we're likely to get for COVID, and also the audit of the accounts have been complete, because when we pulled our unaudited accounts together, we were one of the first in Scotland to do so as an IJB, and some of the guidance and so on then started to drip out afterwards. So there may be some changes required to the financial accounts and how and changes required to the reserves in relation to where stuff's ring fenced. So that's where we're kind of working on at the moment. There was a report to the Risk Audit and Performance Committee, which I can circulate around all the members, which highlights the financial position to the end of the financial year.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all good. It's just we wouldn't want people to think that the IJB was awash with cash, because that's clearly not the reality of the situation. But people seeing 15.4 million in reserves might think that. So I think circulating the report that went to RAP would be really helpful, and maybe considering, although because the final audited accounts aren't coming back to the IJB, they're going to RAP for sign off. I wonder if it might be worth putting in a financial update at some point to the IJB, either in the August or November meetings, because by then the position on COVID will be completely clear and everybody will know where you stand as you're starting to prepare for the budget next year, which will probably be a lot more challenging. My second point was on the portfolio management arrangements, and this is obviously a really good development because it's proper integration. I just wanted assurance about the impact on the senior leadership team of the IJB, and obviously as Sandra as Chief Officer has had her responsibilities expanded in the interim. So I wondered if we could just have a description of how the IJB or the Health and Social Care Partnership senior leadership team is going to operate while you've got this additional portfolio responsibility, Sandra.
So I can come back on that. 2 points. The first point being is it's interim arrangements at the moment, so really working through how that's going to look. And also the second point with support to the leadership team. We've had several papers have been issued to the leadership team on how we will look at that management, and also we've had a session about how we'll work and how our meeting schedules, our one-to-ones, and how support systems will look for that. So if required, I can certainly bring back a service update from that and include how the support in the July paper, can bring back how the team will be supported as part of that paper, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm very conscious that because of the next paper that's coming, I'm not going to be at the July meeting, but I think that would be a good idea. I may as well give you all additional work to do just before I leave. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah, and we'll note that. We'll note that for inclusion. John Tomlinson.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, that point that Sarah's just raised is an important one. So look forward to that coming back so that we can support but be assured that the capacity is there. So my other question is about the care homes, and there's a lot of information here which is very helpful and demonstrates that there's a lot of attention going into this. There's one bit that I'm a wee bit curious on in terms of infection and prevention control. So I'm aware in other parts of the system that sustaining behavioural change around this has been an important issue, including some of the potential physical aspects of the buildings in terms of being able to sustain in breaks, the distancing, etc. So I just like to be assured on that side of it. Is that explicitly part of the work that's ongoing to support the well-being and the ability to sustain the infection and prevention control?
I can come in on that, and I think if needs be, if needs supplemental, can I ask Claire? So with regards to breaks and things, that is absolutely looked at, John, and just as it says in the report, we continue to monitor on a daily basis on TURAS all the number of people with infections. So we do have a good handle on how that's progressing. I would say that with regards to break areas, and that's all part of the assessment visits that are undertaken, but I'm going to bring Claire in just to formalise and add on anything that she needs to. And I see Fiona's there as well if there's any additionality required in particular. Thank you both.
Hi, good morning, Chair, morning members. As Sandra says, we regularly are undertaking insurance visits, and the IPC is obviously part of that work. We also have weekly provider forums where we're constantly updating on good practice, sharing good practice within the care homes. We've just had published a new IPC guidance for care homes as well. So we're going to be working very closely with all the care homes to support them to embed all that recommendations within the IPC guidance, because we realise it's complex. There's a lot of work to be done, so we're going to be supporting them to embed that new guidance. Thank you.
Okay, I suppose, sorry, Chen, not to go too long on this, but it is that aspect of behavioural change and recognising that is quite difficult for people, especially as things start to open up again. So I just want to be assured on that aspect being addressed.
I see Fiona has her hand up. Fiona, do you want to add to what Claire has said?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So, John, it is just to give you that assurance, it is absolutely something that we look at, and we have seen some standards slipping again. So there was a big focus at the beginning, and I would definitely have said we were very confident. What we are finding on our repeat visits, that we are seeing some things slipping. We're humans, that, you know, people get a bit more relaxed, the numbers are going down. You know, we see it in the street, never mind in care homes. So we're absolutely, it's something we do look at. We do speak to the staff about regularly. They have got signs in place. They've got all that visual prompts that we can have. So we make sure that that's all still available, and just have that ongoing conversations with care home managers and providers to keep that message coming that, you know, we still need to maintain, although things are improving, you know, there is still COVID out there. And so there's definitely that very key message. And if we have any concerns, John, we would go back and visit that home. We wouldn't wait the 16 weeks. We'll go back in and visit that a much quicker period.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, all. John, have you other comments, or your hand's still up?
Oh, sorry, that's me finished.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't see any other hands up. So thank you, Sandra, for that very detailed Chief Officer report today. It was really helpful to have that laid out. Now move on to item 10, which is IJB membership, and a paper around modifications from Aberdeen City Council, as Sarah Duncan is going to be stepping down from the IJB. Derek, do you want to introduce this paper?
Yes, thank you for that, Chair. The report before the board informs, just as the Chair has said there, a change in the member nomination from one of the constituent authorities, Aberdeen City Council. Effectively, Councillor Sarah Duncan is to be replaced in IJB membership terms by Councillor Sandra MacDonald. This will bring a further impact in that Councillor Leslie Dunbar, who is the current chair of the Clinical Care Governance Committee, is to be the nominated vice chair of the IJB, and the proposal is that Councillor MacDonald will assume the chair of the Clinical and Care Governance Committee. The target date for this transition is the 28th of May, but as the next Clinical and Care Governance Committee is on the 1st of June, and just to assist that transition and for Councillor MacDonald, it is also suggested that Councillor Dunbar chair that meeting of the committee, but that will require suspension of Standing Order 15.4, which is referenced at 3.1, where it advises that a vice chair of the IJB can't chair committees. I would also want to just advise the board that comment was received during the consultation on this paper from NHS Grampian regarding the wording of Standing Order 2.1 as is referred to in section 3.1 of the paper, but the content there is correct in terms of the scheme as supplemented by the order, which indicates what the membership criteria is. Just to conclude, the recommendations are as at 2.1, and whilst recommendation E seeks an update paper back by 31st of March 2023, the end of the membership period, this may be subject to an earlier review following the local government elections in May next year. That is all I would wish to say in the paper, Chair. Happy to take any supplementaries or clarifications that are sought.
Thanks, Derek. I'll open that up for IJB members. No, not seen any questions from anyone. Okay. So we'll go to the recommendations. I'll just read through them just so that people are clear. And if there's anything anybody wants to query, please just raise your hand. So we're endorsing the nomination of membership to the IJB board as proposed by Aberdeen City Council at paragraph 3.2 for the period 28th May 2021 to 31st of March 2023. We're endorsing the appointment of the vice chair as proposed at paragraph 3.4 for the period to 31st of March 2023. We're endorsing the appointment of Councillor Sandra MacDonald as the Chair of Clinical Care Governance Committee from 28th of May this year to 31st of March 23. We're agreeing to suspend the Standing Order 15.4 to allow Councillor Leslie Dunbar to chair the meeting of the Clinical Care Governance Committee on the 1st of June. And we're instructing the Chief Officer of the Aberdeen Health and Social Care Partnership to consider these arrangements by report to the IJB prior to 31st of March 2023. So I'm seeing we're all in agreement. We're happy to agree those recommendations. I'd also want to note our welcome to Councillor Sandra MacDonald and to Leslie Dunbar in her new role as Vice Chair. We look forward to working with them all. And I see Sandra's joined us. Hello, Sandra. Look forward to getting to know you.
Thank you very much, and likewise, I'm looking forward to joining the board.
Good, excellent. I'd also want to extend our thanks to Councillor Sarah Duncan, who has made a significant contribution to the IJB over many years. I'm not going to do a big spiel, Sarah, you'll be delighted to know, but I would ask, in recognition that this is Sarah's now last meeting, could I ask people to unmute your mics and we'll do a round of applause for Sarah. If people are unmuted, there we go. you got some virtual ones as well. Okay, thanks everyone. We'll move on from that paper. Okay.
Chair, we have Mike Adams has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mike, I didn't see your hand there. Mike, come in.
Okay, not trying to embarrass anybody, but I would be very remiss of me if I didn't say that Ken, on behalf of NHSG's partnership and its team, thanks to Sarah for the work over the last while, and you will be a miss. So yeah, well done and good luck with the future, and welcome to the newbies and not quite newbies, because Leslie's been here for a good while. So, but you will be missed, Sarah, and thank you for your contribution for a partnership perspective.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on from that. Right, item 11, we are on to Adult Protection Committee Biennial Report. Claire, is it Claire Wilson? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is to present the biennial report of the Adult Protection Committee. The report gets submitted to Scottish Government as per the legislation and shows the work of the activity over a 2-year period. So the reporting period would end on March 2020. There is a lot of data in the report, and the reporting just starts at the beginning of the pandemic. So although in the report it does mention COVID, it'll be our next biennial report that we have much more emphasis on the impact of COVID and what we've done. So we've saw an increase since in the reporting periods and referrals. We've worked closely with all partners to ensure across the board that we're recognising and responding to the risk of harm. Adult protection in its nature is very complex, and there is a continual need to raise the profile with staff across all partner agencies and of course within the public itself. You will see in the report there's a number of priorities over the coming year. We've got a new independent chair, which I think will give a new lens to our delivery plan over the next year. And of course, as Leslie intimated, we're doing a lot of work just now in the preparation of an adult protection inspection, which could be at any time before March 2022. So we're doing a lot of work in there as well as our delivery plan as well. So I appreciate, as I say, there's a lot of data and information in the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Claire. I'll open that up now to questions from colleagues. No, I'm not seeing anyone. Claire, I'll maybe start with just a question, and I suppose it's just, so this report is done every 2 years. Is there a set pattern of frequency for when the Clinical Care Governance Committee has oversight and updates on this area?
Yeah, so you're right. So every 2 years, and what we're going to start doing as well, which we haven't in the past, and I was really keen to do, is to do an annual report, which will also, because I think a 2-year period is quite long to kind of evaluate the work. So I have established that we'll do an annual report, which will also come to the IJB, and that'll just show, you know, throughout that period where we've got to. The reporting requirements and the governance around adult protection. So there is regular updates and data that will feed in through the Clinical and Care Governance Group and up to the Clinical and Care Governance Committee, just to keep adult protection obviously a kind of high profile within terms of our activities.
Thanks, Claire. Maybe we could just make a note of that, Derek, in the minute that there, you know, it's not just that IJB are seeing this every 2 years, but there's routine reporting that's coming through our clinical governance structures, and we will now have an annual report to the IJB on this area. Yeah, thank you, Claire. Kim.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually thank you for the report. It's very comprehensive, and I can't say I've managed to study absolutely every word, but I'm just trying to get just a little bit of context around on page 56 of our pack at the very bottom. It mentions about harm and where it's most likely to occur within a homely setting, and then it mentions, you know, this 47% is in a patient's home. And then it rises to 76% when referrals from care homes are included. I was just trying to understand it, to be honest, because I'm not sure I fully understand that. And it's just quite a scary short sentence, and I'm just trying to understand the risk around care. I understand that the 47%, at home, but care homes in particular, and how it changes that percentage. And I might just be misunderstanding it, but I'd appreciate a little bit of clarity if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine, and I totally appreciate the way that sentence is worded. So there is quite a high referral of incidents of harm in a homely setting. So with 46% would be in somebody's own private home, and then obviously increases when you've taken care homes and supported living and all of that areas. What we have seen, though, looking at our referrals, is most of the harm that occurs in care homes and in supported living is actually between residents. It's not, for staff, physically harming residents. It's mostly between the residents. So, if you take in learning disabilities, dementia, supports, it's occurrences between residents, and that, of course, gets reported as well.
Thank you. That helps a lot. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Claire. I'm not seeing anyone else's hands up. Oh, John Tomlinson.
Thank you. I've got kind of sticky buttons here, so I'm not sure what's going on. Yes, just the date of this then only just comes into the pandemic period. So the trends that are different because of that, just picking up your earlier point then, Claire, those will start to come to us through clinical and care governance. I suppose specifically, the harms that are being exacerbated by that is a focus that.
Yes, absolutely. And we have a data framework that is going to be that feeds in through the clinical and care governance group and up to committee, because I think it's really important just now that we understand, I suppose, the impact of the pandemic, because we actually still don't know the full impact of the pandemic. So when COVID hit, we initially saw our referrals decrease. So as everything paused and services stopped, there was this concern about hidden harm, that we weren't getting the same referrals. But so we did see it decrease for a short period of time and then increases again. But what we did do as a committee, we had more, we had monthly meetings, we had a risk register about how did we respond to the pandemic and how did we recognise harm and respond to harm when the same amount of people weren't being seen, so services weren't clapping eyes on people. So we did feel there was a lot of people going to be isolated. So as a group, as a committee, we did a lot of work to try and raise the profile and keep, I suppose, harm at the forefront and really identify those who were at harm. So we have seen throughout the pandemic, we have seen our referrals kind of remain static. There is obviously people who we have a referral in that have maybe been isolated and maybe have been harmed that we've not known about, as I say, because there's been a lot of work, and that's why we need to do it multi-agency, because that's the way to raise the profile and get the referrals in and identify people. But COVID, as I say, we're doing a lot of work around hidden harm, and that is going to continue throughout the year and into next year. I'm not sure if that answers your question, John. I see Angela's got her hand up as well.
Yeah, Angela, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks, Claire. Just to build on what Claire said, John, just to remind you, and I know you're probably familiar with this, the Chief Officer Group has the statutory responsibility for adult and child protection. I chair the Chief Officer Group within the city. The Adult Protection Committees and the Child Protection Committees, which again we're statutorily required to have, all feed into the Chief Officer Group. Throughout the pandemic, both adult and child protection and COG have met with an increased frequency, and it's the structure of COG, John, where the fundamental assurance is provided around the ongoing management of risk. And certainly there was an increased frequency of COG meetings throughout the duration. There's been a very explicit requirement from government in terms of the data that's been required to be reported again for both child and adult protection. So whilst you might feel there's a significant time lag in the data that you're being presented with through the biennial report, important to give you the assurance that actually, as the chair of the Chief Officer Group, we've had significant enhanced real-time data throughout. And again, there's a kind of data pack which evidences that, notwithstanding the kind of personal risk to staff, that we managed to maintain a high level of face-to-face contact, both in terms of child protection and adult protection cases. So, John, just to give you that assurance that whilst there's a time lag on the biennial report that you're seeing, the structures of COG, adult protection, child protection have all been stepped up throughout the entirety, and significant data and assurance around the management of that risk.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Thank you, Angela, and hopefully we can capture some of that discussion in the minute. I think it is really important that we're having that high-level overview, but there is real-time oversight happening, which is really critical. Shona McFarlane's hands up.
Hi there. I just wanted to ask about how it combines in with mental health aspects with the adults and child protection, how that's fed back, or is that seen as completely separate to the protections that obviously are afforded through the system? Could somebody highlight that to me? Thank you.
Claire, do you want to come back on that, or?
Sorry, I didn't really understand the question. Sorry, is this in terms of our reporting for those with mental health issues?
Yeah, I just wanted to understand if these were picked up, how they were actually dealt with. Do you deal with them as part of your setup, or are they actually put across to be dealt with elsewhere with mental health specialists? That's what I wanted to know. Thanks.
So if there is somebody that's reported as being at risk of harm and they have got mental health disorders, then obviously we work with specialist mental health services. If they're not at risk of harm, they wouldn't really come into the adult protection route. They would just be going straight to the services. So under adult protection legislation, it is only those who are at risk of harm that we would be working with, and then the mental health part, because not everybody with a mental health issue is going to be at risk of harm, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for that. It was just actually to find out if you actually just signpost, or if you actually have a route through to the mental health professionals for people that are at risk to be dealt with that have underlying mental health issues that are also needing protection.
Yes, absolutely. We work jointly with them in mental health services. Are actually I'm a statutory member of the Adult Protection Committee, but we would always do joint work with specialist services when we have those open to us. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. That answers my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonah. Thanks, Claire. I don't see any other hands up, so I think we'll move on from this site. We've been asked to note the content of this report, and we'll also note the the new frequency of reports on this coming to the IJB. So thank you, Claire, for that. I see Alan Gray has joined us. Welcome, Alan. Good to see you with us today. Hi. Item 12 on the agenda is the 6-monthly strategic risk review register. Martin, do you want to introduce this paper?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So the report presents the IJB with its strategic risk register as part of the IJB's 6-monthly consideration and review of its strategic risks. The risk register is appended to the covering report. The report also presents to the IJB the decisions of the Risk Audit Performance Committee of the 27th of April 2021, which John Thomason mentioned earlier. So the committee at that meeting considered the risk register. And as I said, the kind of reflections are in the report. So the report specifically recommends the addition of a risk on the IJB becoming a Category 1 responder under the Civil Contingency Act. So that's picking up on the decision of the IJB from its previous meeting. It's also recommending the removal of risk 10, which is the EU exit risk, and proposes that a review of risk 3, the hosted services risk, be presented to the Risk Audit and Performance Committee in September. I'm happy to take any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. I'll open that up for people. I think I still see Shona's hand. Shona, I'm taking that's from the previous item. Unless you want
sorry about that. I'll put my hand down. Thank you.
Sarah has her hand up. Sarah.
Thank you. The risk register is always fascinating. I think I'm really welcoming the workshop in October. I think it would be good to have a kind of edit of the risk register, because obviously the mitigations and the gaps in assurance have been built up over the last 4 years. And I think it's getting a bit unwieldy, and I suspect it's an absolute nightmare for Martin to keep managing. So I would suggest that there's a kind of rewrite and an edit of the content of that, and it's discussed at the workshop that's proposed. I have a specific question, which is kind of a follow-up from the question I asked at the Chief Officer report about the finances. It's in respect of risks 2, which is considered a very high risk at financial failure and projecting an overspend. The impact said to be almost certain, or the likelihood is said to be almost certain, and the impact is major. And I wondered if consideration had been given to adjusting that risk, given our financial position at the moment.
Thank you, Sarah. Martin, do you want to come back on that?
I see that Alex has got his hand up, so I think maybe he might be best to answer that one.
Yes, Alex.
Yeah, I did give it some consideration, and I was close to bringing it down, but I thought what we do is just hold it the way it is until we get the first monitoring of the financial year, and then see where it goes from there. So it did go through my head as well that, maybe that should come down, but just until we get a little bit more certainty around about things for this coming financial year, I kept it the way it was, but it would be my intention to bring it down if we start to get a bit more certainty about that sort of stuff.
Okay, so I presume that the likelihood wouldn't change, because it would always, or the impact, sorry, wouldn't change. It would always have a major impact, but it might be the likelihood that is adjusted. Yeah,
I mean that risk was high before, and then we moved it to very high when we didn't have the certainty over the COVID funding. So we need to take a view on that once we get to June and see where it goes. Yeah, but the likelihood, it would be the likelihood. And I guess with having a risk fund now at £2.5 million and then an integration and change fund, then the likelihood of there being an overspend and that impacting on our partners is significantly reduced.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. John Cook.
Right, I've got sticky buttons this morning for some reason. Just very briefly to echo Sarah's point about the value of having the workshop in October. I think the workshops that we've been having on other issues have been terribly helpful. And I think with the risk register, because we look at it on quite a regular basis, it always looks very, very similar. So sometimes you read it and you think, actually, has it changed? Or am I just reading what I think is there because it looks like it was last time? So I think actually having some ring fence time is a good idea. That was it.
Thanks, John. That's really helpful. And Sarah's reminder as well about our desire to edit it a bit, so that maybe the detail on it just relates to this year and we kind of remove quite a lot of the older stuff. I think that would be really helpful ahead of the October meeting. I don't see any other hands up. People content that we go to the recommendations for this? Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to go through them all. Please raise your hand if there's any that you're not comfortable with. It is recommended that the IJB note Appendix A the current position on the Strategic Risk Register, that we add Risk 11. It is recommended that the IJB approve Appendix A relating to the IJB's duties under the Civil Contingencies Act 2004, as endorsed by the Risk Audit and Performance Committee at its meeting on 27th of April. 2.3, that we remove Risk 10 It was recommended that IJB approve the removal of risk 10, which is European Union exit from the Strategic Risk Register, as endorsed by the Risk Audit and Performance Committee at its meeting on 27th of April, noting that any workforce risks arising from the EU exit will be captured within Risk 9 workforce. And 2.4, that we note review of Risk 3. IJB is asked to note that a review of Risk 3 hosted services will be presented to the September 2021 meeting of the Risk Audit and Performance Committee, as supported at its committee on 27th of April 2021. And we'll maybe just note those details in the minute as well about looking at the financial risk later in the year once things are more certain, and an editing of the detail that's in the risk register ahead of the workshop in October. Okay, yeah, happy with that. Thank you, and thank you, Martin, for your continued work on that for us. Very good. We're now on to item 13, which is the Qualities and Equalities Outcome Report. That's over to Alison MacLeod. And just by way of introduction, and John Cook was reminding me there, we had a very good workshop last week with Alison and colleagues from ACFO and Scottish Care, which I think was really informative and well received. And I see Jane and Wendy are with us today, so welcome, and I'll hand over to you guys to introduce this report.
Thanks, Luann, and you've stolen a bit of my thunder here, but yes, as these papers were developed in collaboration with our partners, I've invited Wendy and Jane along today, hopefully to be able to answer any questions. And as you mentioned, yes, we did have the development session last week, and the present for those who weren't able to manage along to that, we did circulate the presentation from that to all of IJB and the leadership team, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. But just really to give a very brief recap, we have duties under the Equality Act and which brings us our equality duty, and we also have the Scottish specific public sector equality duties. We have the Fairer Scotland duty, and also recently we have been talking more and more about ensuring that we take a human rights approach to everything that we do. So the papers that you have in front of you today is hopefully bringing us a little bit step further along on our journey of ensuring that we meet all of these obligations. We have a duty to publish equality outcomes and to publish a report on progress against these every 2 years. So the partnership first published equality outcomes in 2016, and these had a 4-year duration. We published our first progress report on these in 2018. And last year in 2020, we were due to report again on those outcomes, as well as to refresh the equality outcomes. However, this work was delayed due to COVID. Appendix A in the report is actually the progress report that has now been developed. And I think we have to acknowledge that whilst we were meeting our duty in terms of having these equality outcomes and publishing reports, perhaps with all the busyness that was around integration and getting ourselves organised operationally, we perhaps didn't pay as much attention to monitoring the delivery of those outcomes. Whilst we acknowledge that there's a lot of work ongoing within services, and that services do consider equalities and those with protected characteristics when planning and delivering services, we didn't really have the mechanisms in place to be able to capture and report on that as much as we would have liked. What we did was we created an equality subgroup, which is part of the strategic planning group and reports into the strategic planning group, and we asked them to work on the equality, refreshing the equality outcomes, and coming up with a plan, if you like, for how we could improve on delivering the duties that we have in relation to equalities. So the equality subgroup, the membership of that includes members of the partnership. I chair that group, and we also have our engagement officer on that group. We have colleagues from Aberdeen City Council, both the equality officer there and also a representative from housing. We also have partners, our colleagues from ACFO and from Scottish Care. And we also have the Grampian Regional Equality Council, or GREC, represented on that group as well. So we began work in October, just looking at what we needed to do, and we commissioned GREC in particular to undertake some research and consultation to help us prepare for what our revised equality outcomes should look like. Appendix B in your papers details the findings from their research, and that was the evidence that we used to develop the equality outcomes that we're presenting today for approval. Our aim, obviously, is to embed equalities and human rights into everything that we do. And Appendix C is our proposed equality outcomes and mainstreaming framework. We approached this in the same way as we did our strategic plan, in that we are proposing overarching outcomes supported by SMART actions. And it's important to note that the action plan is still in development, and indeed that it will remain dynamic, whilst the equality outcomes will remain as they are for the next 4 years. The actions below that may flex and change as required. We felt it was important to ensure that the actions were realistic and achievable, and so these were developed in collaboration with staff and partners. In order to maintain a focus on this agenda, you'll notice that we are suggesting that we appoint diverse city officers, which in essence are similar to our digital champions or our self-directed support ambassadors. So people within services who have a particular interest in equalities and who will be supported by the equality subgroup, and will receive training and support to ensure that they can move on and support people within their services to ensure that we meet our equality duty. So, as I say, we felt it was important to ensure the actions were realistic and achievable, and so these actions were developed in collaboration with staff and partners. And in order to maintain focus on the agenda, the subgroup will monitor delivery of the framework on a quarterly basis. We'll report to the Risk Audit and Performance Committee every 6 months, and we will report annually to the IJB over and above the required biannual reporting. And finally, the final paper in that's attached to the report is the Health Inequality Impact Assessment, and we are proposing that we change our approach slightly and use this template, which is based on a Public Health Scotland template, and which basically covers all of the duties that we have in relation to equality, in relation to Fairer Scotland, and in relation to human rights. So, as well as adopting the impact assessment, so that we can assess any new strategy, any new policy, any change to service provision, we are proposing that we change the section, the implication section on the IJB and committee report templates to ensure just to have a single section which relates to that one overarching assessment that's going to be undertaken. So it will be entitled Equality, Fairer Scotland and Human Rights Implications. So I think that's probably all I want to say in terms of the papers that you have in front of you, and hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Alison, and thanks to Scottish Care and ACVO and GREC and all the partners for pulling together on this, and you can see the huge amount of thought and work that's gone into it. I see John Cook has got his hand up. We'll go to John first.
Thanks. Yeah, it was just a relatively minor point. On pages 170 and 172 of the pack, we mention mosques, Sikh temples, Thai temples, and Christian churches, etc. I'm just wondering whether we ought to just put faith groups, because we're not mentioning Hindu temples or synagogues, so don't want people to feel left out. Just a thought.
Thanks, John. I'll maybe ask Wendy to comment on that.
Absolutely. Can people hear me? I thought I had a problem with my mic. Absolutely, and thank you, John. I think we were putting down it was just a brain dump at the time we were writing it to get people to think. But absolutely, faith and non-belief organisations as well, you know. So I think absolutely this was around working together, and we take that on board, and absolutely in terms of faith groups, we can change it to that. No objection whatsoever.
Thanks. Just thought it'd be a bit more
inclusive.
So we didn't miss anybody out. Because I spotted no synagogues, no Hindu temples, and I was thinking, who else have I forgotten?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. That's a good point, John. We want to be as inclusive as possible. So a number of hands up. I'm not sure which order they appeared in, but I'll go Leslie Dunbar and then Alison Murray. Leslie first.
Hi. First off, just to congratulate the people involved with the producing of this report. It's obviously been an extensive and really positive and progressive piece of work. I'm just looking for some clarity, really, or maybe some clarity and assurance, because I hear you talking about in terms of the health impact the health improvement impact assessment, about how you're going to take the equality duties and also the human rights duties as well. So what I'm less clear about is, it seems to me there's some kind of inconsistency about how you integrate equalities and human rights, or certainly in terms of reading the documents. So, for example, page 141, it talks about we will be looking to refresh the process to incorporate human rights into the integrated impact assessments. Okay, so what I wanted to get was just a sense of, how we're going to progress this, the human rights part of it, because it seems to me we may be missing a trick if we're rolling out all the work around the equalities framework and the equalities outcomes, and we're not getting into human rights as well. And I'm not suggesting that's what you're doing, but I'm not clear from these reports, because it seems to me that there's not a consistency. So I'd like to know about that. And I suppose just I'm putting it in the context of, like the Feely report, in terms of that we do have to, as an IJB, look at how we adopt and, are consistent about a human rights-based approach in terms of services we provide. So it's really key that everybody understands, how we're doing that.
Thanks, Leslie. Yes, you've just reminded me, or you've drawn my that I've not drawing your attention to another piece of information in the report, and that is that we will bring forward an engagement policy to the IJB in August. And that will hopefully bring a bit more detail around about the how we're going to try and ensure that we consider equalities and Fairer Scotland duty and human rights in everything that we do. But in the health inequalities impact assessment template, that is what we'll use when we are looking at service delivery, when we're looking at perhaps revising service delivery, doing things differently, when we're introducing new policies, when we're introducing strategy. And that template takes you through all of the, it prompts us to consider all of the protected characteristics under the equality duty. It takes us through each and every one of the human rights implications. It also covers the Fairer Scotland duty and also health inequalities. So when we're considering delivering services, changing services, we work our way through that template and we consider what implications could that change have and what can we do to ensure that we mitigate those implications. So that's how we're going to use that. And as I say, it covers everything. It covers equality, it covers Fairer Scotland, it covers human rights, and it also covers health inequalities. So I'm not sure if that makes it any clearer, or perhaps when we bring forward the engagement policy and the guidance for staff on engagement, perhaps that might make it a little bit clearer at that point.
I think the health improvement impact assessment is clear. It's just, I think, the way that you've reported, you know, that it's not embedded at the moment. There's not a clear, I think, you know, like it's really more maybe about the report itself rather than about what you're going to actually do. So it'll be good to get the engagement policy. But
I see Wendy's got her hand up, so I'm not sure if she's got something to add. Do you want to come in, Wendy?
Yes, please. I think this report is very much in line with our duties imposed on us by the Equality Act, but more specifically by the Scottish specific public sector equality duties, to report on how we're embedding the Equality Act and all of the Scottish specific public sector equality duties. In addition, and lots of public authorities have not been quick off the mark in terms of embedding human rights into an integrated impact assessment process. And I actually think that the title of the Health Inequalities Impact Assessment is slightly misleading. But this was a framework that was decided suited the needs of the partnership going forward in the integration joint board. But maybe an integrated impact assessment is a better description, that it takes into the key components as outlined by Alison, the equality duty, human rights, Fairer Scotland duty. It also takes into account children's rights and sort of poverty and equality. So it combines everything. So I'm just wondering if, you know, we want to consider amending the title so it's absolutely clear it's not about health inequalities. It's a health and wellbeing focused integrated impact assessment, bringing those pieces of legislation together under the one assessment.
I think that would be really helpful, actually, because I think that, for example, I know that, you know, Aberdeen City Council's had an integrated approach in terms of equalities and human rights going back to probably at least 2008. So that in terms of the way it does an integrated assessment, it's already there. So, you know, there's, you know, there'll be social care staff that are very, very familiar with all of this. I suspect it's, you know, maybe the IJB's just been a bit late at the, you know, the catch up, if you like, is happening now. So I think what we call things is really important, and how we you know, like, you know, what emphasis we put on it, I think is really important as well. Thanks.
Thanks,
So
Leslie.
just to confirm, Leslie, we have used the ACC template up until now. That has been the template that we've used. This one just introduces the health inequalities on top of what's in the ACC one.
Okay.
Okay. Conscious of time, there's a few more hands up, so we'll take some more questions before coming to recommendations. So Alison next, and then Alison Murray, and then John Tomlinson.
Hi, yes, thanks. Just a couple of queries. One was actually related to the progress in the 1820 report. It mentions about accessibility audits of buildings and also information for disability and I think it was age as well. It sort of links to the next item as well, is that autism hasn't been included within the sort of disability assessment, and I think under, you know, the actual environment, because that can make a big impact. Things like the light, sound, visual that people with autism often have. Can be oversensitive to light and sound and noise and things like that. And I was just curious that it was, and the same again with information, pictorial information can be helpful there. And that is, I noticed, an item within the autism strategy, but those two things don't seem to have been linked. My other question was about age as a protected characteristic. I noticed it tends to look at the older age bracket, but another group who I think it's a difficult time for is 16 to 18-year-olds, those transitioning to adulthood. I noticed you've put about transitioning to adult services, but actually I don't know if you've actually looked at how 16-year, 18-year-olds find engaging with the health service. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Alison MacLeod, do you want to take that point about the autism query and the teenage aspect?
Yeah, certainly in terms of the autism query, as I say, the action plan, the framework is still developing, and I think that's an area that we've still to finalise the detail on. So that's really useful, that input, and we'll certainly take that on board. I see Wendy nodding and taking notes, so we'll make sure that we get that captured. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I caught the question on transition, if you like, but I see Jane's got her hand up. I don't know if Jane wants to come in on the last point or on this one.
Yes, I just wanted to say that Alison's right. I mean, in terms of having a look at the transition, that the 16 to 25-year-olds, we went out to all third sector organisations to see if there was any evidence in the last sort of the last year or last 2 years that they could help us with and submit. One piece of evidence that we did have was the Scottish Government Tech Pathfinder project on domestic abuse. Now those findings weren't released until January, but we had special permission to give the information to the equality subgroup. Now in that documentation, there's specific findings from Safe Lives, which are doing an Aberdeen project on 16 to 25-year-olds and how they're experiencing accessing services in the area of domestic abuse. So the call did go out, but obviously at this stage the idea is to have a framework in which we're doing that on a continual basis to make sure any research that's coming in from third sector, independent sector, and throughout the whole health and social care partnership is included as we go on. But you're right, the transition area is still a piece of work to be done, and I know there's a lot of work being done in the partnership on it. But just to let you know that we did send the call out to try and get as inclusive response of evidence that we could, but as you appreciate, there's so many different areas. But the good thing is one of the impressive things has been the response of the identified lead officers that will help us in the future to make the framework come alive. And
I think Leslie's point earlier is that there is a huge amount of work already being done, and it's really important to capture that. And some of the staff have felt they haven't been able to feed into a process where that can be captured, but they do feel they can within this framework. So I think, Alison, your points are incredibly relevant, and we have to get it better and we have to get it right. So thank you so much for your question.
So thank you. Yes, I've got a teenager who's on a waiting list and will probably tip over to being in an adult service while she's sitting on the waiting list. So it's to have orthodontic teeth out, and the waiting list for that is long. But yes, I think she's rather nervous at the thought that she might have to act that through the adult scheme just after her 16th birthday. So I think it is, I mean, one way might be to actually engage through the school services to actually find out how what that age group's experience is of accessing healthcare. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. And maybe it's something for the engagement policy that Alison MacLeod mentioned earlier that's coming later in the year. But thank you, really helpful points there, Alison. John Tomlinson and then Shona McFarlane.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to add my acknowledgement of the considerable work that's been done on this. Also welcome the way it seems a work in progress, and look forward to seeing that evolve over the coming period. Specific question I've got is about, I'm interested in the assessments, and I think it's fair to say that there's not been that many that have been referenced in reports that are coming to us at the IJB in committees, but happy to be corrected if that's not right. That would be my impression. And reference in reports is fairly minimal. Are we anticipating through this to see something a bit more around that and published assessments undertaken?
Yes, absolutely, John. That's our intention. The impact assessment for the mainstreaming framework has been done, and if approved today, we will publish that at the same time as we publish the framework, and it would be our intention to do that going forward as well. With everything that we need, the engagement policy that we are bringing forward will, and the associated guidance for staff will make sure it's very clear that they need to do the assessment very early in the process, and that is part of developing any paper that comes forward to IJB for decisions, so that you have the full information on that assessment and how it's been taken into account. So that will be part of the reporting, and absolutely, as required, we will be publishing the assessments.
That's great. That's anticipated my second question, which is the timing of it. So that's brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Really important point as well. Shona McFarlane.
Sorry, I've got sticky buttons to do as well. So sorry about that. So yeah, it's about the transition and looking at the relevant statutes to this. I just wondered if anybody had considered the GDPR implications of this, you know, and protection of information sharing. If you had a comment about that.
Thanks, Alison.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that we would be sharing. Well, I know we wouldn't be sharing personal information. So you know, we would be collating the views of groups of within our communities, and reporting what we heard. Not necessarily attributing it to any individual. So I'm not sure we would be breaching GDPR regulations there. We can certainly take advice on that, but I think it's something that we would be conscious that we wouldn't do.
Okay, I think it's just because there has to be a purpose for the data that you're actually collecting. So I would like to see an opinion on that, if You don't
So
mind?
do you mean in terms of the equality data that we publish? Because we are required to publish equality data, but again, that's not personalised. That's just numbers and percentages.
Yeah, it was just for, because initially, obviously, you're going to have to resource the information, so it was just protection of that because you have data subjects. So, you know, perhaps that is a question for legal. I don't know.
Yeah, we can certainly look into that further, Shona. Wendy's got her hand up, so I don't know if she wants to comment.
Yeah, we've got very strong, clear guidance from both the Scottish Government and the Equality and Human Rights regulator appointed by the Scottish Parliament on evidence that we gather, and we'll be using that in terms of their guidance about how we gather it, and that you're absolutely right in terms of gathering the information from people has to be for a purpose, and that purpose will be to eliminate discrimination, to improve inclusivity in services, and to develop services to meet the specific needs of people with the relevant protected characteristics and throughout the process. So happy to share that as it develops, and certainly if it's coming from this, I would have thought if it's the Scottish Government and the parliamentary appointed regulators' guidance that it meets the threshold for GDPR.
Thanks for that. I just I didn't find it was particularly clear, but thank you for clarifying that point. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. Sarah Duncan.
Thank you. I think it's a follow-up to John Tomlinson's point about equality, about impact assessments and publishing them. Is there going to be very clear, publicly accessible guidance about when assessments will be done and when they won't be done? Because I'm aware that we have had issues in the past of people demanding an assessment, and we have said we don't need to do one in this case. And I think there's still an awful lot of confusion, not just with the public, but also with staff about when they're required to do an impact assessment. And I would have thought the presumption is if in doubt, you do one, but maybe that needs to be clearly stated as the policy. So it's absolutely embedded in our processes going forward. And also, I do think it would be helpful to give some examples of when we wouldn't do one, just so people are clear about that.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, and that's something that we will bring forward with our engagement policy. But I know Wendy has a very well rehearsed response to this particular question. So if it's okay, Luann, I'll ask Wendy to come in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for your question, Sarah. Where we start in terms of an impact assessment is with proportionality and relevance. And we have to evidence that. I developed in a previous role a pro forma to capture that so that you can evidence if you're saying that this is not proportionate and it's not relevant and we don't have to take this further forward, we capture that and that's made available, that's published because we have a duty to assess all decisions. The impact in terms of the protected characteristics. So a couple of examples would be in procurement, if you were purchasing, so it's nothing to do with, I'm going to use an example that's a bit left field, but say you were spending £1 million in terms of the procurement of road materials, then it would have no relevance to protected characteristics, but you would have to do your modern slavery element, you would have to do your human trafficking statement, you would have to ensure that whoever wins a tender complies with equalities. If you were looking at, say, changing the provision of a health service from private to NHS, then actually the service isn't changing. So there's no impact on anybody, it's just who's delivering it is changing. So that would not require a robust, or we used to in the old days, I can go back to equality strands when we talked about a full equality impact assessment. We now talk about robust. But at that time you were saying, well, actually there's going to be no impact on service delivery, it's not going to change, it's just who's delivering it's changing. Therefore, it doesn't require the proportionality and relevance would find that. However, if you were changing the times that you were delivering a service, then you would have to, you're looking at who's using the service. And my most favourite one is the bus that was taken off because it was only used 20% of the time. Therefore, it wasn't economically viable. But it was challenged, and when you analysed it, 100% of the people using it had a relevant protected characteristic to health services because it was the only bus that took you up the hill, round the corner and to the surgery. You could get 2 buses, but then people were paying 4 bus fares. So you were talking about poverty and inequality. So that bus is back on and it's subsidised. You know, so it's looking at the proportionality and the relevance and knowing who's using the service, and vitally who's not using the service and why not, because it could be how it's being delivered excludes people from using it.
Thank you. That's really clear, and I think it's really, really important that that preliminary assessment of whether an assessment is needed is published. And I think the confusion often arises because we're changing service provider, but when the service provider changes, they then want to change the service. And then people say, why didn't you do an impact assessment when you decided to change the service provider? So I think working through that as part of your engagement policy might help clarify the processes that are followed.
Thank you, and thanks, Wendy. I'm conscious of time, and I think we'll have a fuller discussion on this when we have the engagement paper come into the IJB, and it may be helpful to have some examples in, as Sarah suggested, so that we can, you know, really think of real live examples. But I'm going to move us on now. I don't see any other hands up or any new hands, certainly. So I'll go to recommendations. But firstly, I hope you've really heard our appreciation and acknowledgement of all the work that's gone into this. It's very evident in the paper. There's a lot of work going on and will continue. This is clearly complex and an evolving area, and that's what we want it to be as an IJB. So I'll go to recommendations, and I'm thinking of maybe adding one, but the first one is that we are to note the progress made on the existing equality outcomes in Appendix A. We are to approve the proposed equality outcomes and mainstreaming framework 21 to 25 and reporting schedule as described in paragraph 3.16. We approve the revised approach to undertaking health inequality impact assessments, Appendix D. Now, I did note there was a query about what we call that, but I'm not minded to change it mid-meeting. But if within the next 24 hours the 3 of you come together and think there's a better title for it, then come back to us. But at the moment, we'll stick with the title that we have, rather than make something up in the middle of the meeting. That would be my sense. D is we approve the consequential amendment to the IJB and committee report templates to replace both the Equalities and Fairer Scotland duty sections with a single section entitled Equalities, Fairer Scotland and Health and Equality, and that the Health and Equalities impact assessments will be published on the Aberdeen Health and Social Care website. And I think just to formalise that we also note, as this is evolving, that we are requiring a 6-monthly report to RAP and an annual report on progress to the full IJB, so that we're clearly cited on this. It's a really important area for us. It's hugely complex, and we want to be on the journey and understand how things are progressing, and indeed areas that are challenging as well, and be cited on that. So if we can add that in as additional recommendation, are people content with that? I'm seeing heads nodding, so I'll take that as a yes from people. But once again, thank you. Thanks to colleagues, Scottish Care and ACFO and GREC for all their work on this. Derek.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to highlight the time to you at 11:28, whether you wish to consider taking the next update paper and then having the break, or whether you want to have the break just now.
Thank you, Derek. Completely forgotten about that. Shall we do one more paper, and then that would feel like halfway through the meeting? Is that okay? Yeah. Right. Let's move on to our Aberdeen City Autism Strategy Update Report. I see we have Jenny Ray and Kevin Dawson with us today. Are you guys going to introduce this paper for us? Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Just people will be familiar with the Aberdeen City Autism Strategy and Action Plan because it's been through the board a couple of times. Just to highlight that it's a partnership plan because we do it jointly with our Aberdeen City Council colleagues for children and young people. So if you like, the implementation of the action plan sits with the Partnership for Adults and our colleagues in Aberdeen City for children and younger people, but we work together. And we'll be doing there's a similar report to go to the council committee in a couple of weeks. I guess if we'd been asked to give this report back in late autumn, I think we wouldn't be given a very positive report, because everything was put on hold round about the implementation plan with the COVID emergency response. And it was just sort of summertime that we managed to look at how we could look at priorities to get some things going again. So the biggest, I mean, the good news is, the biggest thing is, long-standing issue for the adult service has been the absence of a service for people needing an assessment and diagnosis. And we did some work with the National Autism Implementation Team back in November 2019. And we've finally managed to get a service up and running with some non-recurring Scottish Government funding in partnership with our Aberdeenshire colleagues. And that's the main update against the action plan. But it'd be fair to say, when we looked at it, that was by far the highest priority when we started, and it was the highest priority when we looked at it again in autumn time. And so probably just to highlight that, and we will be updating and reprioritising the action plan as the year progresses. I think we'll give an update. I think we'll be able to give a much more comprehensive indication of progress when we do our interim report to the Clinical Governance Committee later in the year. I don't really know if there's much more to highlight than that. Well, we're hoping that the clinical lead for that team would be able to join us, but I understand she's maybe got patient commitments this morning, so she's maybe struggling to join us. Just with the fluidity of the IJB agenda, let's put it that way. She was struggling to work around her patient commitments. So that's all. I don't know if Jenny wants to add to that.
I think that covers off most of the update. Probably in addition to that, just to say there are some national developments taking place. So there have been a couple of national reports coming through around assessing the impact of the national autism strategy. And then there's also been a paper tied in with learning disability services around kind of transformation and particular action points, primarily for Scottish Government, but also cascade down kind of regionally and locally as well. So we'd want to take all those things into account when refreshing the action plan and the strategy. And we're imagining that there will be some shift nationally now that we have kind of elections passed with. There is the potential for an autism commissioner essentially to be appointed through Scottish Government. Now that may be the equivalent of a minister, we're not quite sure yet, but we do think there'll be movement over the course of this year as to kind of representation within Scottish Government, and that may then adjust the ways in which we may want to represent locally in terms of our strategy and action plan.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Kevin. I'll open that up now to questions from IJB members or any comments. Shona, I see your hands up, but I don't know if that's from the previous item.
Yeah, apologies, Lynn.
It's okay, it's gone. Any comments or questions from? Okay. I'm not seeing any comments or questions coming up on the hands. So Kevin and Jenny, thank you very much for coming along. I think the key will be the update at the November clinical care governance meeting, where there's a bit more progress and we see how the new service is settling in. It'll be good to see that, and indeed how the national sort of sighting on this develops as well. So I will go to recommendations if there is no questions from anyone. Okay, so we're recommended 2 items: to note the report and information on progress against the action plan as presented in Appendix A, and B, that we note an interim update report will be provided to Clinical and Care Governance Committee in November 2021. And also to, I think, just to thank the team for all the work that's gone on during COVID and to date with moving forward with the action plan. So thank you all for that.
Thank you, Chair. We'll pass that on to everybody that's been involved in the projects. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
So if I'm not seeing any more comments on that, and I think it's probably time for a break. Derek, do we think 10 minutes? Is that sufficient for people to stretch their legs and get a coffee, and we could come back at.
Can we perhaps make it 15, Luann, just to
15?
give people that chance?
Okay.
Okay, so it's slow kettles, and we'll come back at 11:50. Yeah.
Yeah. Back at 11:50. Are you going to? Do we need to leave the meeting? No. Do we just
So
put our cameras
what you
on?
do is, if everybody wants to stay in the meeting,
okay,
I am going to stop this recording, and I'll restart it when we come back.
Okay. So we'll see you all at 11:50. Thank you.